Hopkinsville, Kentucky, 1955. 11 people report being attacked at a rural farmhouse. They claim the attackers were small, humanoid, and unaffected by gunfire. Police arrive within the hour. They find bullet holes, broken windows, but no bodies. If you enjoy this kind of investigation, please subscribe, like, and share the video. It helps the channel more than you think. Let's begin. Hopkinsville, Kentucky in 1955 was the kind of place where very little changed from one day to the next. The town was small, rural, surrounded by open fields and tree lines that swallowed the horizon once the sun went down. The Sutton farmhouse stood several miles outside the center of town, separated from neighboring properties by farmland and patches of woodland. At night, the area became almost completely dark. There were no streetlights, no highway traffic, just insects, wind, and whatever moved beyond the tree line. On the evening of August 21st, 11 people were gathered at the farmhouse. The group included members of the Sutton family and a visiting couple, Billy Ray Taylor and his wife June. It was not a party, not an event, just relatives spending time together after a long day. Shortly before 7 p.m., Billy Ray Taylor stepped outside to draw water from the well. While doing so, he noticed something in the sky. He later described it as a bright object, metallic in appearance, moving across the horizon before descending behind the trees roughly a quarter mile from the house. It was not described as large. It made no explosion. There was no visible smoke, just a bright object, moving with purpose. Taylor rushed back inside and told the others what he had seen. The reaction was restrained. Some assumed it was a shooting star. Others suggested it could have been an aircraft light viewed at the wrong angle. No one panicked. No one called authorities. The evening continued, but not for long. As darkness settled over the property, the family dog began barking aggressively. This was not unusual at first. Rural dogs often react to wildlife moving at night, but the barking did not stop. It intensified. Then abruptly, it ceased. When one of the family members checked on the animal, they found it hiding beneath the house, trembling and unwilling to come out. The air outside felt different, quieter than it should have been. A decision was made to step outside and look around the yard. What they saw near the tree line would change the tone of the entire night, and it would mark the beginning of one of the most unusual police reports in Kentucky history. When the men stepped outside, they expected to find an animal, perhaps a stray dog or something moving through the fields. Instead, they noticed movement near the edge of the property. At first, it was difficult to judge distance. The yard was only partially lit, and beyond it, the darkness was complete. One of the men later said the figure seemed to glide forward rather than walk. As it came closer, details became visible. The figure was small, roughly 3 to 4 feet tall. Its head appeared unusually large compared to its body. The ears were pointed, extending outward, and its eyes reflected the light in a way several witnesses described as glowing. Its arms were raised, almost as if balancing itself. No one spoke for a moment. The men assumed it could be an intruder wearing unusual clothing, or perhaps someone attempting a prank. But the proportions seemed wrong. The movement seemed unnatural. One of the men raised a shotgun. A shot was fired. According to multiple witnesses, the figure did not collapse. Instead, they heard a metallic sound, described later as similar to hitting an empty metal bucket. The figure flipped backward, regained its balance, and disappeared into the darkness. The reaction inside the house was immediate. Doors were locked, windows checked, weapons loaded again. The atmosphere shifted from curiosity to fear. Minutes later, another figure appeared. This one was seen near a window peering inside. A handgun was fired through the glass. Again, witnesses claimed the target was struck, but did not fall. Instead, it drifted away, vanishing beyond the porch. The events escalated quickly. Shapes were reported moving across the roof. Scratching sounds came from outside walls. At times, family members said they could see small hands gripping the window frames before disappearing into the night. The group split their attention between every entrance to the house. Some watched the doors, others watched the windows. Each time a figure appeared, shots were fired. Each time, the same result. No blood, no body, no visible injury. One witness later recalled that the figures seemed more curious than aggressive, approaching, retreating, then returning again minutes later. The encounter did not resemble a sudden attack. It felt more like a prolonged standoff. As the hours passed, fear turned into exhaustion. The house was growing louder, shattered glass, gunfire echoes, shouting, while outside, the darkness remained still. By the time midnight approached, the group realized they could not remain inside indefinitely. They made a decision. They would leave the farmhouse and drive into town. What they brought with them was not evidence, but a story that would leave local police struggling to explain what they had just witnessed. What followed was not a single confrontation. It was repetition. According to the witnesses, the figures did not rush the house all at once. They appeared one at a time, sometimes near a window, sometimes at the edge of the yard, occasionally on the roof. Each appearance triggered the same response: a weapon raised, a shot fired, a metallic sound. Multiple witnesses later described that sound in nearly identical terms, like striking metal with force. Not flesh, not bone, something hollow. In several accounts, the figures seemed to fall or flip backward when struck, but they did not remain on the ground. They recovered quickly and retreated into the darkness. Then they returned. At one point, a figure was reportedly seen gripping the edge of the roof. Another was described peering through a side window, its large eyes reflecting light back into the room. Shots were fired through glass. Still, no body was recovered. Inside the farmhouse, tension built slowly rather than explosively. This was not chaotic screaming or blind panic. The group organized themselves. Some watched doors. Others monitored windows. Ammunition was reloaded carefully. They expected the situation to end after the first few encounters. It did not. The figures kept their distance, rarely crossing fully into the light. Witnesses described their surfaces as reflective, almost silvery under illumination, not glowing, but catching light in an unusual way. There were no spoken words, no clear sounds beyond movement and impact. What made the situation unsettling was not aggression. It was persistence. The appearances continued for hours. Each time a shape emerged from the darkness, the response was immediate. Each time, the result was the same. No blood, no remains, no clear evidence of injury. Fatigue began to replace adrenaline. The house smelled of gunpowder. Broken glass covered the floor. Outside, the rural night remained otherwise silent. The witnesses later insisted the figures did not behave like animals. They did not charge. They did not retreat permanently. They seemed to observe and return. This was not a rapid assault. It was, as one account later suggested, something closer to a prolonged test of endurance, a slow standoff between a farmhouse and whatever stood just beyond its light. By the time the clock approached midnight, the situation inside the farmhouse had changed. Ammunition was running low. Nerves were wearing down, and the appearances outside showed no sign of stopping. The group made a decision. Remaining inside felt more dangerous than leaving. Several vehicles were prepared quickly. Family members gathered together, weapons still close, and moved toward the cars as a group. The drive into Hopkinsville was short, but tense. Few words were exchanged. No one wanted to be the last person to leave the house. When they arrived at the local police station, officers immediately noticed the condition of the group. 11 people entered almost at once, frightened, exhausted, but able to describe events clearly. Their stories overlapped in key details: small figures, repeated appearances, and gunfire that seemed ineffective. Law enforcement treated the situation seriously. Reports of armed intruders were not uncommon in rural areas, and officers assumed they were responding to a violent confrontation or possible home invasion. Sheriff Russell Greenwell assembled a response team that included local deputies, state police, and military police from nearby Fort Campbell. Within a short time, nearly 20 officers headed toward the farmhouse. The convoy arrived to find the property quiet. No movement was visible outside. Officers secured the area before beginning a systematic search. They inspected the perimeter first, the yard, surrounding trees, and nearby fields. Flashlights swept across the property while officers looked for signs of intruders, tracks, or evidence of injury. Inside the house, the aftermath was clear. Windows had been shattered. Walls and doors showed impact marks from gunfire. Spent shell casings covered sections of the floor and porch. The damage confirmed that weapons had been fired repeatedly over an extended period. What officers did not find was equally significant. No bodies, no blood, no footprints clearly indicating an unknown creature. Despite the absence of physical evidence, officers later acknowledged that the witnesses appeared genuinely terrified. Their statements remained consistent even when taken separately. Police stayed at the property for several hours, expecting that whoever or whatever had been seen might return. Nothing did. Gradually, officers began to leave the scene. The Sutton family eventually returned to the farmhouse, but few slept that night. The official investigation produced no clear explanation. The case was recorded but not solved, and by morning the story had already started to spread beyond Hopkinsville. When officers completed their initial sweep of the property, the most striking detail was the absence of what they had expected to find. There were no intruders, no bodies, no injured suspects hiding in the fields, no abandoned equipment or discarded clothing. If an attack had occurred, it had left no obvious perpetrators behind. What remained was the physical condition of the farmhouse itself. Exterior walls showed multiple bullet impacts. Window frames were splintered. Glass lay scattered across the porch and interior floors. Door panels bore visible marks consistent with repeated gunfire. Spent shell casings were collected from inside and outside the house, confirming that weapons had been discharged numerous times over several hours. The damage pattern suggested defensive firing from within the home outward, not an exchange of gunfire between two armed groups. Officers expanded their search radius. Flashlights moved methodically across the yard, scanning the tree line and low grass. Deputies examined soft patches of earth for impressions that might indicate movement toward or away from the house. Some irregular marks were noted in the damp ground. A few officers later described them as unusual, though none were preserved or photographed in a way that allowed for definitive analysis. No clear footprints were documented. No blood traces were found. There were no signs of forced entry. The roof was inspected. The surrounding fields were checked again before officers gradually concluded that no immediate threat remained. One detail recorded in subsequent reports stood out. Despite the extraordinary nature of the claims, responding officers did not describe the witnesses as intoxicated, incoherent, or behaving irrationally. The group appeared frightened, fatigued, and visibly shaken, but consistent in their statements. Individual accounts aligned in core descriptions: small figures, repeated appearances, gunfire that produced no visible injury. Law enforcement could confirm that shots had been fired. They could confirm that damage had occurred. What they could not confirm was the presence of any creature, human or otherwise, matching the descriptions provided. By the early hours of the morning, officers cleared the scene. The official position was cautious. There was no evidence of an ongoing threat, but there was also no conventional explanation for what had triggered the sustained response inside that farmhouse. The physical record told only part of the story, and it left critical questions unanswered. In the days that followed, the Hopkinsville incident spread quickly beyond Kentucky. Newspapers picked up the story almost immediately. Headlines described little green men, turning a local police call into a national curiosity. As coverage expanded, so did skepticism. Investigators, journalists, and later researchers attempted to explain what had happened that night using more conventional theories. One of the most cited explanations involves wildlife, specifically the great horned owl, a large nocturnal bird common in the region. The owl's reflective eyes can appear bright when caught in direct light, and its wingspan and silhouette may seem unusual under stress or poor visibility. Some skeptics suggested that armed and frightened individuals could have mistaken large owls for humanoid figures, especially in darkness. Another theory focuses on psychological factors. 11 people were gathered together in a confined space, armed, anxious, and reacting to unexpected events. Under stress, perception can shift rapidly. A single misinterpretation, a shadow, an animal, a sound, can spread through a group and reinforce itself. What begins as uncertainty can evolve into shared certainty. Others argued that the story grew larger through media exaggeration. Early reports emphasized the more sensational details, and the phrase "little green men" quickly overshadowed the more restrained language used by witnesses and police. As the story traveled, facts blended with folklore. Yet even with these explanations, certain aspects remained difficult to dismiss completely. Law enforcement confirmed that significant gunfire occurred. The damage to the home was real. The fear described by witnesses appeared genuine. Officers who responded did not classify the group as intoxicated or unstable. Perhaps most unusual is what did not happen afterward. None of the witnesses attempted to profit from the story in any meaningful way. There were no book deals, no lecture tours, no repeated attempts to seek publicity. Over time, most simply returned to normal life, and none of them publicly recanted their account. The case slowly shifted from police record to local legend. Researchers continued to debate whether the incident represents misidentification, collective fear amplified by circumstance, or something that still lacks explanation. Decades later, no physical evidence has emerged that confirms the presence of unknown creatures. But no definitive explanation has fully satisfied every element of the story either. The Hopkinsville file remains open in the way many unexplained cases do, not because new evidence appears, but because the questions never fully disappear. On that night in 1955, 11 people fired hundreds of rounds into the dark. They believed they were defending themselves from something real. Whether that something existed outside their perception, or only within it, remains unknown. And somewhere between documented fact and lasting folklore, the story continues to survive.